In the previous video in lab, we enabled port security and boom, right away got a port security violation because the default for the maximum number of MAC addresses on that port to be learned is just 1. So in this video and lab, we'll take a look at some customization and tweaking for port security that can make it more agreeable and survivable in a production environment. So I have reset the lab, and here's what I propose we do. Let's go through the steps of making sure we're not a dynamic port. So these two, to make sure it's an access port, not dynamically negotiated. Also the switch port host for the benefit of spanning tree and port fast, and also for the lab for this to work correctly. Please use that as well. So we did those in the previous video. Now for the new commands, we have switch port, port security, maximum. So instead of saying, hey, maximum number of source MAC addresses on this gig 00 port, let's go ahead and set it to a number that's something a little more reasonable, because you might have devices or virtual devices that have 2 or 3 MAC addresses on that port. And so I think 5 or whatever your company thinks is a reasonable number is going to help in not having violations or alerts when there's not a real problem. We can also, if we know that Bob's computer off gig 00 is a specific MAC address, we can hard code it with switch port, port security, MAC-address, and put in that layer 2 12 hexadecimal character address. And that will guarantee that Bob is going to be one of those 5 that's going to be allowed. Another option is we can plug in Bob's computer and use this command, switch port, port security, MAC-address sticky. And what that does, it takes the MAC addresses that are learned on that port dynamically, and it puts them in the running config. So once those MAC addresses have been learned, we can do a copy run start, and then they'll be in the startup config as well. So the sticky option is a creative way of dynamically learning an address and getting it into the running config without having to manually configure it. And then based on your policy at your company, you can decide what you want the violation response to be. In this case, if we go above 5 MAC addresses, a 6th MAC address shows up, the default violation is to shut down the port. But we may not want to shut down the port. Maybe we just want to restrict any MAC addresses above those 5 from being able to forward traffic. So both the restrict and protect options do that. And the restrict, if used instead of the protect, the restrict also adds some additional logging capabilities. It also increments the port security hit counter for violations when it occurs. So here's what I propose we do. Let's implement this back on gig 00. And for shutdown, let's leave the default violation action as shutdown, because if we set it to 5 and we only have 3 MAC addresses coming in off that port, it won't hit the violation unless there's some funny business going on. And in that case, we'd want the port possibly to shut down so that we can stop and investigate and find out what's going on. So in the hands-on lab, let's go to our admin PC, which is DCNUG. We'll open up PuTTY. We'll go to the access layer switch on gig 00, and let's implement these commands. So here on DCNUG, we'll open up MT PuTTY, and on the left, we'll grab the servers tab and open up access 1. So we'll go to configuration mode, interface gig 0/0, and we'll do switch port access VLAN 10, and switch port mode access, great, and then also switch port host, which will do the switch port mode access for us, but also enables port fast as well. And in the lab, it's required to make it work. All right, so looking at our notes, that's the first 3 steps. Next, let's change the maximum number of MAC addresses. Instead of being 1, we'll change it to 5. So switch port, port security, maximum of 5, press enter. I also want you to note that we have not yet enabled the feature of port security on this interface. We're making all these changes regarding port security, but it's not actually enabled until we use the command switch port, port-security all by itself and press enter, and that's the moment port security is going to be enabled on this interface. Next, let's manually configure a MAC address that we want port security to be aware of on this port. So the syntax is switch port, port security, MAC-address, and then the syntax. If you use a question mark, it'll tell us the syntax. And there's giving us the format it wants us to put in the 48-bit MAC address. So we're going to use 1122, a period, 3344, a period, and a 5566, because that's the format they're asking for, and press enter. Oh, it doesn't like that because of the first bits of that MAC address. Let's take a look at my notes. Oh, yeah. Okay, so we'll use 00. So there are some rules in the first several bits of the MAC address, and I broke those rules. So hit the up arrow key, and we'll change the first 2 numbers to 00. That should make it happy. There you go. All right. Next, let's go ahead and add the sticky command so that any dynamically learned MAC addresses will be placed in the running config. So we'll type in switch port, port security, MAC address, and the keyword sticky, and press enter. And for the violation, let's leave the violation as shut down, to shut down the port if we go over 5. Now, as I mentioned, the very important aspect we need to do is to enable this. So if we did a do show port security right now, you'll notice that port security is not enabled on any interfaces, including this gig00, because we have to use this command. Switch port, port security, and press enter, boom, and that enables it. So if we use the up arrow key a couple times and do a show port security, now we can see that gig00 has it enabled. The maximum MAC addresses is 5. Currently it knows about 1. And the security action is shut down. We can also do a do show port security. And it's not helping me because I'm in interface configuration mode, so context sensitive help is out. But do show port security for interface gig 0/0 is the commands. We'll press enter. And that's showing us the details for gig00. So it's enabled. The violation is shut down if it happens. And currently, look at that, we're up to 2 MAC addresses. Great, up to a maximum of 5. It also shows that we have 1 configured MAC address and 1 sticky MAC address. Fantastic. So let's exit out of configuration mode and let's do a show MAC address table for interface gig00. All right, so we've got 3 MAC addresses. And now that we're willing to support 5 MAC addresses, let's go generate a failure by going to our Kali Linux box. And on the Kali Linux box, we'll log in as root. The password is TOOR, which is root backwards. And we'll open up a terminal. So we'll open up the terminal by clicking the icon for that over here on the left. And here's to a ping to 10.16.0.1 just to verify connectivity. That's great, no problem there. That's the VLAN 10 layer 3 interface of core 1 that we just pinged. And if we want to ping core 2's VLAN 10 layer 3 interface, we could put its IP address in and ping it. That's great. And I'll do a control C to stop that as well. And if we go back to DCNUG, to our admin PC, and to the CLI of the access layer switch, hit the up arrow key, you'll notice we now have some additional MAC addresses, including we have the MAC address for our Kali Linux box right there. So we're still under the window for port security, which is a maximum of 5 for that port. So let's go back to the Kali Linux box. And at the command line, let's do an MACOF. We're going to do a CAM table overflow attack. And we'll do a -I for interface. And the interface we want to use is ETH0 for Ethernet 0 space. And for the number, let's just send in 10. Let's not get too crazy. So we'll do a -N space 10, press enter, and it sent those 10 in. If we go back to DCNUG, I'm expecting that we have a port security violation. Here it is. And it was caused by that MAC address. That must have been the 6th one as seen by the switch on that port. And as a result, the interface is now set to down. And if we do a show interface status and then error disable, enter, that'll show us all the interfaces that are currently in an error disabled state and also what caused it. So gig00 is error disabled due to port security violation, and there it stays. And so there the port sits in error disabled state. Now it's a bummer because this requires by default manual intervention. We've got to go in, we've got to shut down the port, we got to do a no shut to bring it back up, and then that port can start working again. But the moment that a port security violation happens again, it's going to shut down the port. So let's solve that problem now by doing a shut and no shut for that gig00 interface, which will clear the error and bring the port up. So to do that, we'll go into interface configuration mode for interface gig 0/0, and we'll do a shutdown, and then we'll do a no shutdown. And then if you use the up arrow command a few times to show interface status for error disabled, it's no longer error disabled. And also, if we go back to the Kali Linux box, and instead of doing some crazy MAC off attack, we just do a simple ping again, our traffic should once again be able to go through. So now that that switch port is up and running again, if there's another port security violation, meaning going above the 5 number mark for source MAC addresses, boom, it'll shut that port down again. In the next video, what I like to do is walk you through an automated method where we can train the switch, hey, if there's a port security violation, wait 30 seconds, and then bring it back up. And then if there's another violation, bring it down. And that way we can have it, like after a short timeout, bring up a port automatically from a shutdown state if there's a port security violation. And at the same time, we can look at our logs, get the messages that it's happening, and we can research it. But it means we don't have to come in at 2 a.m. in the morning or some other inconvenient time to manually bring a port out of an error disabled state. So we'll cover all that in the next video. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.